Around 605 BC. Somebody say that was a long time ago. Just making sure you're listening a little bit at least. A man named Nebuchadnezzar became king in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was a pretty amazing fellow. Babylon was the greatest nation on earth. Babylon ruled other nations. This made Nebuchadnezzar a king of kings, which is an unusual title, one that we typically reserve for the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. But Nebuchadnezzar was a king of kings. 43 years he reigned atop the greatest nation in the world. He became one of the most significant monarchs of antiquity. Modern research has shown that Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest monarch of Babylon, perhaps the greatest monarch of the East in general. He must have possessed an enormous command of human labor. Now listen to these numbers. 9/10 of Babylon itself and 19/20. Now that's 90 and 95% of all of the ruins that we've been able to find regarding Babylon held almost countless numbers of bricks stamped with his name. In other words, 90 to 95% of everything that we know that was built by the great nation of Babylon was built under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. This was the second iteration of Nebuchadnezzar. He had had a predecessor by this name. He made Babylon a city of world renown. He built up the city and made it world famous. He built for one of his wives one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world called the Hanging Gardens. We know little of it, but the things that we read of it, it was spectacular. And much of his reign is recorded by the prophet Daniel, who himself was quite famous in Babylon. It was this same Nebuchadnezzar who was told by Daniel he would descend into insanity. For a significant period of his life, he literally lost his mind. And about a year later, it came to pass. And for 3.5 years, Nebuchadnezzar lived as an animal. And he said, "Finally, I lifted my eyes toward heaven." He humbled himself before God, and he said, "My understanding returned to me." But during his reign, he also had built an immense idol for himself. It was likely not an image of himself, as many have imagined, but instead it was an image that was in some fashion to represent the greatness of Babylon. The success and the power of Babylon would have been depicted in this image. It was most historians don't believe it was an image of Nebuchadnezzar. Nonetheless, it was his command that every person in the city would bow to his idol. Everybody. When the music would play, as was the decree, every person in the city lines up and bows and pays homage to the image. And it was at this time that 3 young men came to prominence. One Hananiah, one Mishael, and one Azariah. The first chapter of Daniel proves that these men already knew God and knew how to walk with God and had already proven God was with them. And they already had the respect of the king's staff, and they had the fear of his viziers. And they were in Babylon. And they had a choice to make. Will we bow or will we not? Now, the 37th chapter of the book of Psalms and the 23rd verse says this: the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. And by way of explanation, he is capitalized. God delights in the way of the man whose steps that he orders. Verse 24 continues, though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down. For the Lord upholds him with his hand. And then David said, I've been young and I've been old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. I had a picture for you and I forgot to give it to the projection team. The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord. When you hear that statement and the continuance, and God delights in his way, that means his direction. God's excited about his direction. You want to consider that guy to be a guy that's living for God and doing really well. You want to think that that guy is a fellow that ain't struggling with sin. You want to think that this man, this good man that David describes, a good man, his steps are ordered of the Lord. You want to imagine that he doesn't have problems, because God delights in his way. God's excited about that man's direction. So if God's excited about his direction, you just want to imagine, holy cow, this guy's doing pretty good. So what a shift to go from that sentence and in the same breath say, though he fall. Wait. I didn't think I qualified for that first part. I didn't think there's any possible way. He can't be talking about me. I got issues. He can't be talking about me. I've got struggles. He can't be talking about me because I got a whole bunch of things that I don't have worked out right now. Though he fall, though, wait a minute. That was me this week. That was me yesterday. That was me Wednesday. That was me Tuesday. Whatever your story may be for this past week, you read David's word. The steps of a good man are ordered by God. Ordered, that means the description of that literally is God takes his foot in his hand, places it on the ground, takes his next foot in his hand, places it on the ground. And then when you look at it that way, you can understand why God says, and I'm excited about his direction because I'm guiding it. So where in the world and how in the world does this next verse fit this story? Though he fall. What in the world is that? I'll tell you what in the world that is. It's you and me. You got to understand that God has never expected perfection out of humanity because he's not insane. He made us as we are, and it does not take perfection to be a good man or a good lady. It does not take perfection. It takes direction. Here's the picture I wish I had for you. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down. Many of you know exactly what that means. If you don't, here it is. When a shepherd would describe a sheep being cast, a cast sheep as they would describe it today, it is a sheep that has fallen and rolled over on its back. And because the sheep are created in such an awkward weight distribution, when they fall, actually their center of gravity is very, very high on their body. And it's like a truck that's top heavy. If the truck takes a sharp turn, it'll just flip over on its side because of all the weight at the top and not enough at the bottom to balance it out. A sheep, a lamb like this is very top heavy. And so if they fall down off of their feet, if they fall down on their side, they will roll all the way over and their feet will be stuck up in the air and they have no ability to get up. And a predator can destroy them. And they have no defense. They're done. And they will die lying right there unless somebody comes along and picks them up. And so David says the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, and God delights. God is excited about his direction. Though he fall, I don't know how in the world that fits in here, because we're talking about a good man, not somebody that has any kind of problem. Surely that person doesn't fit this. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for God will uphold him. With his hand. In other words, a good man can follow God, have his steps ordered of God, but every now and then get his mind off God, find himself falling down. And yet, while the sheep falls down and flips over and can't get back up, the difference between a person and a sheep is you can always get back up. The shepherd and sheep analogy throughout the Bible that we find as comparing humanity to the sheep, it works great until it gets to cast down, because you can't cast me down. You're never going to find me on my back with my hands and my feet stuck up in the air like some crazy person and saying, I've fallen and I can't get up. You're never going to find me like that spiritually, because the difference between a sheep and Jeffrey Jaco is I can always get back up. I may fall, I may trip, I may lose my direction every now and then, but you can't keep me down, and I will get back up. It's why the prophet said, don't rejoice when I fall. When I get back up, I'm going to punch you in the nose. And then another tremendous gear shift. Though he falls, shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. I've been young and now I'm old. Yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Why? Because God delights in his direction, nor his descendants begging bread. The righteous. Ordered of the Lord is directed of the Lord. A man who seeks the way of the Lord will be directed of the Lord. Not every man seeks the Lord. You don't have to seek the Lord. God does not turn us into robots. If you become a Christian, it doesn't mean that you no longer can make decisions for yourself. It doesn't mean that you no longer can sin. You most certainly can. But if you seek the Lord, you will allow him to order your steps. It's not that you become a robot, it's that you become submitted. And God delights in the way of that good man. That's favor. God favors that man who allows him to order his steps. God favors him. And so if you go back to the story of 3 young men in Nebuchadnezzar's realm, if you go back to them, these 3 righteous young men that were Jews that had decided that we're not going to eat what has been sacrificed to idols. They took a stand on something that others didn't necessarily take the same stand on. And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in Daniel chapter 1 planted their feet and said, we will only worship God. We will worship none other. So it's no surprise that by the time you get to Daniel, the 3rd chapter, and Nebuchadnezzar raises up this tremendous idol that stands towering over everything in Babylon. And there was a lot of tall stuff in Babylon towering over everything. It says everybody's going to bow to it. It's no surprise that Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah said, nope. But God delights in the way of those who allow him to order their steps. And he favors them that whose steps are ordered of him. He favors them. But wait a minute, it's about to not look like favor. These 3 young men that you know better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're Babylonian names, not their Jewish names. They're Babylonian names that they were renamed once they got there as captives. These men who already had the respect of the palace staff, who had the fear of the viziers, the leaders of the palace staff, and these men who had already proven that they were determined to live for God, to do what was right, to not bow to anything other than God. And now they're brought before Nebuchadnezzar, who is aggravated, and then he is furious at them and commands, if you will not bow, and he said, look, I'm going to give you another chance. Go out there and do what I told you to do. Nope. And we don't even need to think about it. Heat the furnace up 7 times, throw them in. That doesn't look much like favor to me. That doesn't much look like God is in control. That doesn't look like God is authoring this story. This doesn't make any sense. What do you mean now? I've taken a stand for you, Lord. Aren't you going to protect me? I have done what you asked. I have refused to bow to anything else. I have refused to prioritize anything else. I have refused to worship and honor anything else. And now heat the furnace up 7 times. And you're telling me that now I'm going to be put into the furnace. And they threw them in the furnace. And it was so hot, the Bible says that the men that threw them in were killed at the entrance of the furnace. Doesn't much look like favor until the king peers in, and these 3 boys are talking about the Cubs and the Reds. 2 teams of which I like neither. It doesn't look much like favor until he looks in there and there's a 4th one in there. Where's the favor in being tossed into a fiery furnace? I'll tell you where the favor is. The favor is that they got to stand in the presence of an angel that they would have never been able to spend time with under any other circumstance. But it was in the fiery furnace where they were able to enter into the presence of God on this level. It was in the fiery furnace where God favored them with an experience and a miracle. You see, miracles often don't happen on the mountaintop. It's a miracle that got you to the mountaintop. Miracles don't often happen when everything's going your way. Miracles happen when God orders your steps into a situation that looks hopeless and helpless, and yet he shows up and says, now I'm going to let you experience my presence in a way that you could not in any other way. That's favor. It may not look like favor, but if I'm allowed to know him in a way I never would have otherwise, he has indeed favored me. He favored me when I fought cancer. He favored me when I fought addiction. He favored me when I found myself in circumstances that I had no control over, and yet he showed up in the middle of them. It may be that our problem is that we don't see favor like God sees favor. God sees favor as in my people get to know me better. We see favor in a new car. I'm going to tell you, don't come tell me that God favored you with a new car if there's a loan attached to it. Don't come tell me. I got a loan on a car. So I don't consider that a favor of God. Don't come tell me how God favored you with a new house and now you're struggling to pay for it. That ain't favor. That's just America messing with your head and all of its materialism. See, we got favor all mixed up. Paul said that I might know him. I'll do whatever, just let me know him. And he said that I might know him in the power of his might, but he also said that I might know him in the fellowship of his suffering, because you don't know the power of his might until you've gotten in the middle of the suffering. But in the suffering, you suddenly realize God still is on the throne, and God still is king, and God still has the authority, and God still is in charge. And it's in that place that I am favored. Oh, I don't know how I got there. I'm not excited about the valley. I'm not excited about being in a situation until I turn around and in the middle of my fire, in the middle of my furnace, there is the presence of the Almighty. And what Nebuchadnezzar didn't realize was he gave these boys the greatest privilege of their existence that day when he thought he ordered their steps and God was in charge the whole time. He favored them. That's what favor looks like. Ordered steps, he leads me. He takes me into situations that I don't understand. And yet in that moment I get to know him in a way I never would have otherwise. It's true that a man following God may lose to the flesh occasionally, but he's not helpless to get back up. You're not ever helplessly down. And so it's quite striking for David to write Psalm 23. Or Psalm 37 when he also wrote Psalm 23. I'm going to read a little bit to you. The Shepherd's Psalm. If my iPad will cooperate. The Lord is my shepherd. What does a shepherd do? He orders the feet of his sheep. He orders the steps of his sheep. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not be without what I need. The long version of that is this: I've been young and I've been old, and I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He favors me, and he leads me beside the still waters, and that looks like favor. Wow, that's good stuff. Great, thanks God. He restores my soul, but why did my soul need to be restored? What's that about? That doesn't make any sense. He restores my soul. What happened to my soul? Life. He leads me in paths of righteousness. Whoa. I thought I was a good man. I thought I was doing okay. Why do I need to be led in paths of righteousness? Why am I not choosing the paths of righteousness? Your flesh will never choose the path of righteousness. Therefore, if you let God lead you, you will always be in the path of righteousness. For his name's sake. Why do I live righteously? Not so I can be this haughty, arrogant Christian who's better than all those crazy sinner folk. He leads me in the path of righteousness. He orders my steps in righteousness so I can honor him. Get out of the mirror with all your holiness. Stand before the cross and realize that it's filthy rags with all of your righteousness. Just give me yours. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me. He didn't learn that sitting on the side of a mountain watching the sheep do good. He learned that facing a bear and a lion. He learned that with such a passion for his sheep that he was willing to lay down his life to rescue one straggler, one wayward sheep that got himself caught up in the mouth of the lion. And David went and took on the lion, and he took on the bear because they were important enough to him. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I'm not going to be afraid of what happens. Why? Why weren't Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael, why weren't they afraid of the furnace? For thou art with me. Brother Tim, I know that God is with me. I'm convinced of that. He'll never leave me. He'll never forsake me. I've got the word of the Lord on that. Matthew 28. I know that God is with me. Where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I in the midst. I know that God is with me. When I worship him, he inhabits the praises of his people. I know this. I believe that. I experience that. I have no doubt about that. But I'm going to tell you something. We have 7 senses built into our lives, and we exist by those senses. And when one is absent, it affects us dramatically. And when one is not there, we are impacted by it. So I'm going to tell you something. It's one thing to say, I know, but it's a whole different ballgame to say, I see. Or I hear. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what's going on in the furnace? He's with me. How do you know he's with me? Well, I got Bible, I got word, I got all this stuff, but if you just look right over there, it's one thing to know. It's a whole different thing when he manifests himself in a human way that we can understand and we can sense with these senses that we exist using to guide our way through life. It's a whole different ballgame to say, I know that I know that I know, but then I've got an experience that nobody can take away from me. My eyes weren't fooling me. I said, Hananiah, do you see what I see? I said, Mishael, do you see what I see? Yeah, Azariah, I can't figure it out. Who is that guy over there? I don't know. Let's go find out. Who is that guy over there? Listen to me. It is in that moment when God reveals himself in a way that he can't reveal himself to you in any other way that you'll begin to understand the value of the furnace and ordered steps. I'm not sure why I went through everything I went through, but I got to know God so well as I went through it. I'm not sure why I faced everything that I faced, but I'm going to tell you, I know God like I never knew him. And these elders on whose shoulders that we stand as young people, you understand something today. They are the ones who've been through the fire and encountered him face to face. They're the ones, you listen to their testimonies, you hear their voice, you heed the voice of warning, and you hear their voice that says you can make it. God has brought me through so much. You got so much more than what I had. Don't let what all that you have steal from you what God wants for you. Ordered steps don't always seem to look like ordered steps. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You know what the rod and the staff are? They're not beatings. It's a guardrail. The sheep know. Straggle too far, the shepherd will come with the rod. Every now and then one will get too far and the shepherd will grab them. The rod and the staff were never meant to be a discussion about how God beats up his people. They were meant to be a promise of a guardrail. Listen, if I say don't go, don't go. If I say stop, stop. Let me order your steps. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I'm thankful that every now and then the voice of God says, wait a minute. You're going to go off the edge of the cliff. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Why am I in the presence of my enemies? Did he lead me there or did I mess up? You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You fill me up in the presence of my enemies. You feed me, you strengthen me, you encourage me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. That's another shepherd reference. That's a reference to the sheep that would get parasites on their heads. The shepherd would pour oil over their heads and kill the parasites, rescue the sheep from the torture. And he said, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Ordered steps. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for his sheep, Jesus said. Nebuchadnezzar could seemingly dictate the next steps of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but in reality, God already had them ordered. Nebuchadnezzar could think, I'm in charge. But I will guarantee you, when he looked into the fiery furnace and there's a fourth guy in there, Nebuchadnezzar's trying to figure out what in the world is going on here. I may not be quite as in charge as what I thought. You see, he could dictate their next steps, but he could not dictate their outcome. He could say, you're going into the fiery furnace, but not before God had already said they're going into the fiery furnace. Why? Could Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have changed their minds? They absolutely could have, and they could have bowed down at any moment to that idol and skipped all of this stuff, but they would have never known God like they knew him. They didn't have to go, but God says, I'm ordering their steps, and since I'm ordering their steps, this is where I'm going to take them. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's going to look like he's doing it, but indeed, I've already ordered their steps. And Nebuchadnezzar thinks that he has an outcome established, but he has no idea. You think that I'm going to let you get your anger satiated, Nebuchadnezzar. What you don't realize is I'm about to take these boys into a place that nobody else will ever go. I'm about to put them in the presence of the Almighty. And they're going to walk out of your fiery furnace and they're going to take over. Steps are an indicator. They're an indicator of expected direction. Direction you're walking is the direction that you're going. You will go the direction that your steps take you. But never forget that direction can change. The day that you let the Lord start ordering your steps, your direction will change. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was ordering their steps, but God had already ordered them because these were his men. These were good men. I hear people say, well, God would never put them in the fiery furnace. He would never put them in the fiery furnace unless he showed up with them. But if he ordered the steps of these men into a fiery furnace made 7 times harder that men died just getting close to, I don't know what he's going to take us through, but I know this. In the middle of it, I'm going to get to know God like I never knew him, and that's favor. That's favor. Stand with me this morning. God's people are people of ordered steps. And I believe that when we pursue him, he will order our steps. But you can quit following anytime. You can quit. You can take your foot out of his hand. But his people, those who choose him, that prioritize him, he will order your steps. He will order your steps. But the steps that God does not order are the steps of those who haven't yet chosen him. There are no robots in the world. There are some gullible people who will believe anything and do anything. But not using your brain doesn't equate to not having one. God doesn't order the steps of those who haven't chosen him. He doesn't direct the steps, therefore he does not take pleasure, and he does not favor. And I preached to you last week about heaven? We're journeying. See, we're really confused. Because we want to talk about favor and how God favors us. And He favors us with new stuff because we keep comparing ourselves to everybody else. And we keep comparing what we have to what they have. And if we can just climb one more rung up the social strata ladder, God has favored us. And God doesn't have a social strata ladder, and He don't care what the social strata ladder looks like. He's not favoring you by elevating you up higher in that. He's favoring you by letting you get to know Him better. God doesn't order the steps of those who have chosen Him or have not chosen Him or even have rejected Him. He doesn't order your steps into sin. He doesn't order your steps into misery. He doesn't order your steps into hurt and scars and devastation. He doesn't. I'm going to tell you what, after those things happen to you, they will order your steps. But they don't have to. If you will let God order your steps. If you will let God take your feet and place them one in front of the other. I know this could look awful complicated. Listen, everybody in here is probably going to go home tonight, try to get a good night's rest, get up tomorrow, and go to your job. And you're wondering, is God ordering my steps? I promise you, if you're prioritizing Him, He'll order your steps all the way through on your job. Somebody say ordered steps. He doesn't order the steps of the sinner. And He won't order your steps to Calvary. But He's made Calvary real accessible to anybody that wants to turn to Him, to start saying, Lord, I want you to start ordering my steps. For 3.5 years, Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind, lived as an animal, slept under the stars. The 4th chapter of Daniel records Nebuchadnezzar's return to cognizance. He says, at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me when I humbled myself before God. That humble part, that's my addition. And he said, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored Him who lives forever. This is a pagan. For His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and His kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. Holy cow, did you hear what Nebuchadnezzar just said about himself? Go tear down the idol. It don't mean nothing anymore. He does according to His will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain His hand or say to Him, what have you done? As if reprimanding Him, what in the world have you done? Like you asked your child after they break something, what did you do? No one can talk to God like that, He says. At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, and my honor and my splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now, I got all my stuff back. All the stuff I'd lost in the physical, I got back. And I, Nebuchadnezzar, now praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. I ask everybody to bow down to my idol. Now I bow down to Him. All of whose works are truth and His ways are justice, and those who walk in pride He is able to put down. I'm telling you, I'm living proof. He says that He's able to put you down if you get all up in pride. One of the greatest monarchs of antiquity, one of the greatest kings in the history of mankind, possibly the greatest monarch in the history of the East, the Middle East, Nebuchadnezzar says, I realize that God is in control. And when he said, when I realized that God was in control, my mind came back to me, and I began to understand some things that I'd never understood. And I got all my stuff back, and I got my respect back, and I got my influence back. And now, when I've gotten all of this stuff back, and I realized that it wasn't worth anything, it wasn't worth anything to begin with, and there's nothing there. Now I praise and extol and honor the King of all, whose works are truth and righteousness and justice. I thought I was in charge when I put those 3 men in that furnace. Turns out I was just part of the plan. I thought I was in charge when I was doing all that stuff. Turns out that God was way more in charge than what I was, and I had no idea what was going on. And He took me out of my mind for 3.5 years. Did God order His steps? I don't know what took Nebuchadnezzar out of his mind for 3.5 years, but God wasn't ordering his steps because the man was living in sin. God brought him out of the insanity. His sin took him in. Quit blaming everything on God. Quit saying that it's God's fault that this happened to me. Quit saying it's God's fault. And listen, if you're in the middle of a struggle and you know you're following God, look around. He's with you. And you're about to experience Him in a way that you probably would have never had a chance to otherwise. But if God is not there and you know that you're there because of a situation, because of choices, quit blaming everything on God and realize that God didn't take you in, but He will bring you out. He will bring you out. He will bring you out. And if a man of Nebuchadnezzar's stature can figure this out, I think there's people in the sanctuary today that also have it figured out. And maybe it's time for you to say, you know what? It's time for me to humble myself before God. I'm going to do it just like this. Altar's open. I wish every person in this room would come down and into this altar. You can kneel, you can bow, you can stand, you can lift up your hands however you want to do it. But I think there's some folks today at the sanctuary who are realizing, you know what? I'm where I am because God hasn't been ordering my steps. And He didn't bring me into this mess, but He will bring me out. And God, I want to start following You. And if I get into a difficult situation, I want it to be because God took me there and He intends to favor me while I am there. Can we fill the altar? I'm not going to beg you.
With anointing.
But boy, I feel the Holy Ghost.
My cups overflow.
I feel the Holy Ghost.
No weapon can harm me. No weapon can.
He will bring you out. He may not have taken you in, but He'll bring you out. And if He took you in, I promise you, He's got a reason. There's a purpose. Come on, get down here and just lift up your hands and humble yourself before God. Seek after His face.
Hallelujah.
I can't imagine a reason to stay in the queue. I can't imagine a reason to not step out and say, you know what, God, even if I have to bring an altar, whatever, I want to get into Your presence, Lord. I want to make sure that my steps are ordered. I want to make sure my steps are ordered. In Jesus' name, order my steps. Order my steps. Lead me and guide me. Let every day be the day of the Lord in my life. Let every day be the day that I follow after You. Listen, if you want to seek Him, if you want to call on Him in repentance, if you want to call on Him right now in desperate need of rescue, call on Him. Jesus, I need You today. I'm not where I need to be. I'm in the middle of a tough situation. I'm not sure how I got here, but I know that You're the only way out.
Gives me assurance.
I promise you, the Spirit of restoration is here.